Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/turquoise umbrella. This is how you kill a Wendigo. My twin sister Janessa was murdered at age 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I'd actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded of how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning on a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into another massive fight. Janessa and I had been looking forward to the trip, and once again our parents' awful communication skills was ruining it before it even began. We snuck out of the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and did all that stuff one typically associated with camping. The next morning everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Janessa realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off, that thing rushing after us with heavy steps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up a tree. Janessa was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I'm still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse lying in the leaves. Her remaining eye always staring up at me. While in therapy there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning after my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in the area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. We're an upper middle class family. Over the last couple of years my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where and I never ask. I usually just wake up and find out they've left yet again. I'm out of high school now and I have no career path yet. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Janessa. Now I'm returning to the forest where she died. Now I'm going to go after the thing that killed her. I've been preparing for this, and if it is a Wendigo like I've suspected, then I'm more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt they would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavily on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up for the last couple of years. As much as I want a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day the more I daydream about dying the same way Janessa did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on knowing that thing is still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out while putting on my backpack and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I don't want anyone else getting hurt in this, I think was my reasoning. But God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you've actually dealt with one. I'm still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive and crazy enough to come back and pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement from a nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pants pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I'd heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos. What if I'm wrong? The thought had been with me ever since I'd stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind a nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me and then hiding behind it again. I didn't bother to walk over and check it out. I finished up my tent, and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire like the one Janessa and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on a sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had moments where we'd gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems. But that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad we'd decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt a warmth not from the fire. A sense of calm overcame me as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Janessa and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded just like Janessa, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As it approached, I could tell it was going over to take a seat at the rock where I'd left the s'more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to the Janessa I remembered pick up the s'more and take a bite. "That's not yours." I surprised myself blurting that out. The fake Janessa ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death was standing right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled out my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was struck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. "I'm trapped, Jeremy." I struggled to keep aim. How dare that thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go. And it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's so much nicer than going home to an empty house and unloving parents. She held her hand out to me. "Trust me, brother. Please." My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Janessa took a step towards me. "Wait, no. It's not Janessa. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better being dead. Prove it." At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollered in pain as it fell to the ground. I'd hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough. I aimed the gun at its heart, but failed to pull the trigger as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dark skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun but desperately wanted to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the later option. I rushed over to the bag I'd left near the tent. Inside was a weapon I'd built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself inside the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why did I have it zipped up? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like on the day of Janessa's death, I ran from the campsite, further into the forest. History was repeating itself. I was going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents were going to lose their last remaining child, all because I couldn't let this go. After at least several minutes, I'd somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I'd gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pulled out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became. I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw at me. Once I reached the campsite, I put my hand out, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put my gun back in my pocket, but I needed free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do just that and used my left hand to pull out a long metal spike. I built it in such a way as to have the spike shoot out at the push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I had to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a bitch. I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo, its cry so loud my ears hurt and began to ring. I'd done it. The spike had pierced the heart. Silver. Weakly the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo, assuming what I'd read up was correct. I rushed back over to where I'd dropped my bag. Inside was a silver axe I'd also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out continuous agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked away at its wrists first. Its claws were the biggest threat and I wanted them gone. Despite the weightlifting I'd been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it again in the head. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As it began waking up again, I found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I'd hacked most of the way through its head, I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple of feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took over an hour, but I'd managed to put each limb, the head, and torso in the trash bags I'd brought along. One by one I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, rip it to pieces, and placed it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and the box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight I'd gotten to know a priest at a church in my area called Street Alphonsus. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face went several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I did it. The Wendigo had been slain. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead, its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Janessa. I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't get anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head in my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before, I whimpered. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger before. I placed some flowers on my sister's grave an hour later. I talked to her tombstone as though she was there listening. I'd like to believe she was and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards I returned home and slept through the day and all night. Once morning came I heard some noise downstairs. I went down to see that my parents were home and sitting down to breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied. We went out west to visit your aunt and uncle. Did you enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and my father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone? God damn it, I'm the only kid you have left. Don't you give a fuck about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. Their light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Janessa is proud of me. But a new task was ahead of me now. A harder task perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death. We'll never be whole again, but I know with some effort we can be better than this. I hope she can continue to give me the strength to put myself together as I progress into adulthood. Second story. This story was shared by you/sleepyhollow_101. Black Magic. I don't think many people play parlor games anymore. It's been a long-standing tradition in my mother's family, but no one else seems to know about the games. Still, I rather enjoy them. They're fun. After my father died when I was still a young child, I found myself spending a lot of time with my mother's side of the family. She still held down a full-time job and it was easier to let my grandparents and, occasionally, aunts and uncles babysit me than pay for a nanny or daycare. Even as a kid, I could sense that my mother wasn't happy with this arrangement. She didn't seem to get along with most of her family. Maybe that's why I was so tense the first few times she left me at my grandparents' house. As a way of easing my nerves, they introduced me to the parlor games, and I was hooked. Parlor games are games that are played indoors, often involving some type of riddles or wordplay. I love their cryptic nature, and it didn't take long for me to figure out the classics. My favorite was the Queen. My grandmother would sit in her armchair as though it was a throne, and my cousins and I would take turns kneeling before her. She would say to us, each in turn, I am the Queen, the most beautiful queen in all the land. You must answer honestly, who do you love? I was the first of us grandchildren to figure out that the answer was, honestly. My grandparents were a wealth of such games. We played the Queen, I'm going on a sailboat, and Rin Tin Tin. We'd play for hours on end, lost in their magic secrecy. My mother would smile a little when I told her about the games. She herself had played them as a child, as had my aunts and uncles. But there was one game that I wasn't allowed to play, a game whose name wasn't to be mentioned in my mother's presence. Black Magic. I learned about it by eavesdropping. Even as a child, I was good at that, and often heard my aunts and uncles discussing it. Whenever it was brought up, they reminisced about how fun it was, how much they had once enjoyed playing it, once. But not anymore. I wondered why, but I learned quickly not to ask. I only brought it up to my mother once, and that was enough to see the fire flare up in her eyes as she hissed, "Never. Ever. Speak that name to me again." So, wisely, I didn't. No, I left the subject very much alone, until just a few weeks ago. It started because my grandfather passed away. Grandma had already died a few years before, and his death was not unexpected, so his passing left us not only with sadness, but also a touch of relief that his pain was over, and that their legacy had ended, surrounded by the love of their children and grandchildren, just a few years apart. The aunts and uncles had gone out to discuss something about the burial, dragging my mother with them, who put up a very good pretense of not loathing all of them, much to my amazement, and all of us grandchildren had gathered in the living room to sit and remember. It was Andrew who brought up the parlor games. "Do you guys remember when we used to play those?" he asked, laughing as some of my cousins groaned. "How could we forget, not when Katie was so good at them." "It almost wasn't fun, with her winning all the time," Darius said, and I shot him a glare. Hey, I couldn't help it that he was a sore loser. "Well, there's one game that she never won, though," said Andrew, giving me a sly sort of look. "What are you guys talking about?" I asked, annoyed to be out of the loop. The whisper came from somewhere across the room. I'm still not sure who said it. "Black magic." My eyes widened and a rush of emotions hit me like a tidal wave. The nostalgia of the games, the curiosity over the one that sent my mother into a fury, the sudden burning need to know what it was. Oh, yes. We were going to play black magic. We arranged ourselves in a circle on the living room floor, with Andrew acting as the caller, which is what we called the person in charge of directing the game. He instructed us to hold hands, and my cousins all grasped each other eagerly, watching me for my reaction. After all, I was the only one who'd never played. "Okay, since it's Katie's first time, she gets to choose," said Andrew. "Choose what?" I asked. He smiled and shook his head. "Choose somebody you don't like." I was bewildered as I sat there, trying to think of someone we all knew. And Coulter? Andrew shook his head impatiently as some of my more conservative cousins glared at me. No, not a celebrity, someone you know personally." I racked my brains again, until I finally came up with a work colleague that I didn't particularly enjoy interacting with, mostly because he was a sexist dirtbag. "Kyle Gentry." Andrew nodded. "Okay, repeat after me," he started. "It's in the moon, it's in the stars, it's black magic." My cousins and I all chanted together. "It's in the moon, it's in the stars, it's black magic." The overhead light flickered a little, but I was the only one to notice, because everyone else had closed their eyes. My gaze drifted to the ceiling and I felt Amalia, who was holding my right hand, squeeze my hand reassuringly. "It's in the breeze, it's in the air, it's black magic." And we repeated. "It's in the breeze, it's in the air, it's black magic." The flickering was getting worse. I heard the TV turning on and off by itself. It seemed as though power was surging and ebbing through all the electronics in the house. I tried to pull my hands away, but my cousins grasped me tighter. Andrew began one last time. "It's in the flesh, it's in the blood, it's black magic." I didn't want to join in, I swear, but my voice didn't seem to agree with me. "It's in the flesh, it's in the blood, it's black magic." The power surged hard and, suddenly, everything burnt out. The light bulbs in the lamps exploded in a hail of sparks. I could hear the fizzing and popping of cooling circuits and wires. The house was dark as sin and deathly quiet. Just then, the front door opened and my aunts and uncles returned with my mother in tow. My Aunt Lucinda looked around disapprovingly, illuminated by the moon through the open door, and asked, Now, were you kids playing black magic?" I scrambled up off the floor and towards my mom, afraid that she would scream at me. Indeed, her siblings were watching her with apprehension. Her face had drained of color and she was looking at me in abject horror. Mom, are you okay?" I asked. She looked at me with a terribly deep sorrow in her eyes before shaking her head and walking away. I got a call the next day about Kyle Gentry. He'd been found dead in his home, apparent heart attack, pretty surprising for someone as young and fit as he was. The strangest thing about it, though, was that all the lights in his house had burned out, and the electrical units were completely shot. I've been racked with guilt ever since. I mean, sure, I didn't like him, but I didn't want him to die. I just thought it was part of the game. That's the most disturbing part, now that I think about it. That it is just a game, to my family, anyway. All of them except for my mother. And now, sitting here and typing this in the dark, on my third bottle of beer as I try to wash the bitter taste of the memory out of my mouth, I think I know why. Just like I think I know what happened to my father. Black magic. Third story. This story was shared by you/firetruck42069. A creature from the woods is stalking me. I live 5 miles away from town in the middle of the woods. I've tried calling the police, but they won't help me. Nobody believes me, everyone thinks I'm crazy. But there's a creature, it's trying to kill me and I'm scared. I don't know what to do. It started last week. It was boiling hot outside. I had said goodbye to my dog Sam. He was an old golden retriever and the only company I had. All my friends live in town and the only way for me to get there is either by walking, which is very tedious, or by riding my bike. I hopped on my bike and grabbed the handlebars, my hands burning from the hot rubber. I work at a factory with low pay. I hate my job, but I'm not gonna find a new one anytime soon. I arrived that day as usual, 15 minutes before I'm supposed to start, which means my boss lets me go home 15 minutes earlier. Instead of going home directly after work, I went out with my friends. I knew Sam would be okay since I left him enough food and water. On my way home it was getting dark. The woods were calm and quiet, but the darkness made it eerie. I only had about a mile left to my home. But there was something I saw that gave me chills. A few yards into the woods I saw something look at me from behind a tree. I couldn't make out the face, but it had a big hand with long claws, grasping the trunk of the tree as it was peeking out. I wanted to believe it was just some animal, but it looked like nothing I had seen before. I arrived home, looking behind me as I walked to the front door and unlocked it. I quickly closed the door behind me and was greeted by a happy dog. "Hi Sam," I said. He was panting, and I understood him. It was like a desert in the house. I opened a few windows, but scared of what I had just seen in the woods, I didn't open them all the way. Since it was getting late and I still had work tomorrow, I grabbed a snack, brushed my teeth and went to bed. I couldn't sleep, it was still too hot, so I decided to go open the back door to let in some more air. I passed Sam, who was sleeping heavy on the couch. Before opening the door I took a quick look outside. Whatever I saw in the woods probably wasn't a threat, right? After opening the door I went back to bed. It was a little cooler than before but still very hot. I woke up to a slam coming from outside. I looked out the window, the motion sensor had gone off and my yard was illuminated. It was probably just a raccoon, I thought to myself, and crawled back into my bed. But apparently the slam had woken up Sam too. He started barking, outside. Tired, I sat up on the bed, rubbed my eyes and started going towards the back door. Something was off. It was no longer hot inside, it was freezing. And it kept getting colder. Sam has stopped barking and I couldn't see him when I went outside. He had probably run off into the woods chasing the raccoon. Sam! I called out, he'd usually come running but now he didn't. Sam! I yelled. Now I heard something in the woods, it was Sam, or so I thought. The woods were dark and it was hard to see. I squinted, trying to spot Sam. Eventually I saw a figure in the dark woods. "Come here, Sam," I said. He didn't come. I started getting worried. My heart was beating very fast. What if it was that thing I saw in the woods earlier? All of a sudden, Sam was tossed into my yard. His throat sliced open, his beautiful golden fur was now covered in blood from claw marks. I was struck with both fear and grief, completely paralyzed and unable to move. "Sam," I said with a quivering voice, thinking maybe he was still alive. He didn't move. My mind was clouded, but I knew exactly what had done this. I broke free from my paralyzed state and bolted towards the back door. As I was running I could hear it behind me. I got inside, turned around, then I saw it for a split second and it was moving fast. I shut the door and locked it. I sighed in relief. But then I heard it scratching and slamming against the door. As it was busy I quickly went to close every window I had opened. But I had forgotten one window, the one in my bedroom. I entered my room and there it was. Its big claws grasping, trying to get the window open. I quickly slammed the window on its hands. I could see its face now. It let out a loud screech, but its mouth wasn't moving. Its face looked like that of a human corpse, but more distorted. Its eyes wide open, yet staring at nothing. Even as I pressed the window against its hands its face remained the same, and it terrified me. Eventually it gave up and I could close the window. It started sprinting back into the woods on all fours. I just now realized how bizarre its body looked. Long, bony limbs and a skinny torso. As it passed Sam, it grabbed him by the legs and pulled him into the woods, dragging him as if he weighed nothing. It was going to eat him, I felt it. It was going to eat my Sam. I sat down on the corner of my bed, and started crying. It's visited me every night, I close all my blinds, but it still knows I'm here, and I know when it's outside. It taps my window with its claws, and it won't stop. It's almost as if it's taunting me. I want to record it as proof. But I'm too scared to look at it. The creature terrifies me, and I don't know what to do. It's only gotten worse. I've started hearing the taps coming from my attic now. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Hillian. Strange things happen in Louisiana. There's a lot to be said about small towns in Louisiana, but that's not important. Most people who aren't from around here don't listen seriously to the things I say anyways. They don't understand that I'm not crazy, lying, or stupid. I know what I'm talking about though. It's the type of thing that's almost considered normal around here. Let me start from the beginning. the beginning of that day at least. It started out good. I stepped out of my bed and my foot landed on something cold. Lifting my foot revealed a penny, heads up. I smiled to myself, my lucky day. I checked my mailbox as I was leaving and was hit with another happy surprise. The check for my tax return was sent to me earlier than expected. I stopped at a coffee shop on my way to work, and discovered that they had just brought back the delicious chocolate lattes they used to have. Better yet, the person in line before me had paid for everyone else in line. This morning was positively serendipitous. I'd never had such a lucky string of events happen to me. It didn't stop there. When I arrived at my dad's flower shop, I was happy to find that we had received a new supply of bleeding hearts. It's been months since we'd had them in stock. My dad always forgets to order them, but they're my absolute favorite. "Morning, Daddy." I greeted him while I inspected the bleeding hearts. "You finally remembered?" "Sorry darlin', wasn't me," he shrugged. "Seems someone had sent for us." I nodded happily. We've had locals do such kind things before. Working at a flower shop is always so nice and peaceful. Everyone in town stops by to get flowers and ask about Mr. Time. I work there with my dad and my sister Liz, a family-run business as long as it's been open. I was flying through my morning routine of tidying, setting up arrangements and displays, and answering calls. I had thought my day was wonderful already, but then I answered a call from a familiar voice. "Hello, Freeman's Flowers, how might I help you?" I said cheerfully as I picked up the phone. Elizabeth? Don't tell Anna I'm doing this okay?" he said hesitantly. He being Damien Dappa, the boy I've had a crush on since elementary school. We were good friends, and I was a little surprised he mistook me for my sister over the phone. I was too curious to correct him, and Liz wasn't here today. "Sure thing, this is Damien, right?" I said. Do you guys have those heart flowers yet?" She's been talking about them forever. "We just got some in today," I replied, probably sounding a little too excited. "Great. Can you send them to her in a pot? I think she'd like it better if they didn't die. I don't want her to know they're from me though." "Sure can, leavin' a note?" I asked. "Yeah, can you write, 'I know how much you love these, D.D.'" I nearly laughed at his idea of anonymity. There was likely not another person in town with his initials, and if there was I had no idea who they might be. I confirmed his order, and let him know that they'd be sent out this afternoon when Dad did the deliveries. By the time the call ended I was happier than a kid in a candy store. It was nearly noon by that point, which meant I had to go check on Mr. Time. He was a gift of sorts, given to the shop when my mama was still around. She was special, and that part of her was sent into me when she passed. The cancer got her good, a tragedy for the whole town. Everyone loved Mama. She was an honest and kind woman. She tried to get Lady Priestess to help her. She was so afraid after she told his Mr. Time had shown her face, but Lady Priestess couldn't cure cancer. Before she passed only her and Lady Priestess could talk to Mr. Time. Lady Priestess isn't her real name, but no one knows anything else to call her by. I swear she's been around longer than the town itself, but she's a mysterious magic practicer. She's the one who gave us Mr. Time. She said she needed a break from caring after him. Mr. Time is an oddity himself. He lay in an open casket in the back of our shop, and Mama insisted that he loves flowers, so we bring him a different one each day. He doesn't have a face, not always that is. He lay there in his dark gray pinstriped suit, and the head above his shoulders bears the features of a mannequin. There's all the hills and valleys of a regular face, but the skin is seamless. No eyelids to blink, no lips to open, no nostrils to breathe. Sealed up tight. Visiting him is usually easy. I always leave with news that'll break someone's heart, but the town is comforted by knowing what's coming. Gives us time to prepare. The thing about Mr. Time is that sometimes he lets me see a face. That's how he talks. He doesn't say anything, but the face he uses tells me everything I need to know. It's the next person who will die in town. He can't tell me how they go, or when they go, so all I know is who will go. He only tells one at a time, the face repeating each day until the person no longer exists. Every time someone dies, our shop gets a rush of traffic the next day. Everyone wants to be the first to hear what Mr. Time told me. Besides Lady Priestess and myself, everyone else in town could only see the seamless face he wears. That's why he's here. Lady Priestess was tired of holding the responsibility. We can't stop telling people what he reveals. The town has gone crazy before over it. It's an accepted fact of life here. We always know who's next. I don't mind doing it. I've become fond of Mr. Time. I brought him bleeding hearts that day, and greeted him cheerfully. I always spoke to him, just like Mama would. I told him about the flowers, and how I'd had such a joyful stroke of luck that day. When I asked him about his day, his response ruined my lucky streak. He wore my face. I asked if he was sure, but the face remained the same. I felt sick, and thanked him for letting me know before I left the shop early. I didn't want to spend my day telling the town that I was going to die. The longest anyone's ever lived after being shown is about a year. I'd be incredibly lucky to make it that far. I hid in my house all day, and when my flower delivery arrived I burst into tears. Bleeding hearts seemed appropriate for my day. Everything had gone from amazing to awful. I composed myself by the next day, getting back into my regular swing. I wanted to make the most of the time I have left. When people asked about Mr. Time, I told them. I got so many pity-filled looks, but I ignored them. I wasn't going to be brought down by this. There was something I kept from the town. I didn't want to scare them. Each day since seeing myself in Mr. Time, my visits got worse. This had never happened before. As each day passed, the face he wore became more mutilated. I was shocked every time. It wasn't a progressive deterioration. Every visit brought a different form of horror. One day I had no eyes, another day featured my skin melted, and yet another showed my lips sewn shut. At that point I realized that I needed to tell someone about this. Lady Priestess was the only one I could go to. She was the only one who knew the details of dark magic. Calling her gave me a huge revelation. Lady Priestess? I asked when the call was answered. Yes, child. She replied calmly. It's Annabelle Freeman. I'm sure you've heard of what Mr. Time has told. She made a noise of agreement in response. I need help, I pleaded. I explained to her the horrifying things I'd seen. Ah, I've seen a similar case. Your mama came to me the same as you. I was shocked. Mama had cancer, why would she come to you? She saw similar such things. She told everyone it was cancer, but I'm the nearest to a doctor she saw. Something else was eating her from the inside. She sounded thoughtful as she said it. Can you help me? I can do for you what I did for your mama. Come see me. She hung up right after. I did end up going to see her, but for all her spells and rituals I've only become sick. I've asked her who will take my place with Mr. Time, and she's told me that it will pass through the women of my family. When I'm gone, Elizabeth will carry on talking to Mr. Time. I'm afraid though, Lady Priestess has placed some sort of spell on me. I can't directly tell anyone in town about her healing. I can't make my fingers write or type the words, I can't force my tongue to form them. My only saving grace is here, where no one in the town roams, where Lady Priestess would never find. She visits my home, I've become bedridden most days. Each day I see her she looks younger, just slightly. I feel myself getting weak, and I swear I've aged more each time I see my reflection. Something is very wrong with what Lady Priestess is doing. There's a reason Lady Priestess has lived longer than anyone in town knows. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Nick 2020. Wendigo. I never thought it would be the last time I saw my little sister. It started out as such a typical Friday afternoon, the bell rung, and we had the whole weekend to look forward to. We lived in a small town in Michigan. It was one of those towns where everyone knew everyone, one of those towns where you basically felt safe anywhere you went. We lived in a small split-level house, my little sister and I shared a bedroom, and my parents were directly across the hall from us. Our house backed onto a deep, vast forest, and through the middle of the forest was a river. The woods always provided a sort of natural playground for the local kids, building tree forts, playing hide-and-go-seek, and swimming the more shallow parts of the river. My little sister and I felt especially lucky, the woods were essentially my backyard, and we really felt like they were ours. Our parents were fine with us playing in the woods, they just had one rule: don't cross to the other side of the river. The woods on our side of the river were quite well traveled by all the locals, by age 7 you knew them like the back of your hand. The other side of the river, however, was much less traveled. It was our town's myth, kind of our own scary claim to fame. The Mi'kmaq tribe had largely settled the area around our town, so there were a lot of stories based on Native American culture. Everyone's favorite story was about the Wendigo. A Wendigo is a Native American legend, supposedly a half-man half-beast type creature. The rumor is that during a harsh Michigan winter, a member of the Mi'kmaq tribe and his hunting partner got caught during a blizzard. The tribe member's partner died, and with no food, the tribe member was forced to eat him. Native Americans believe that Wendigos are born when a member of their tribe is forced to resort to cannibalism due to harsh conditions, such as weather, or a famine. And so, legend was born, and people began to believe that a Wendigo hunted for more flesh in our woods. Everyone from here has a story, that they would be having a campfire in the woods, and all of a sudden a deep resonating roar would sound out through the forest. The belief around here was that the Wendigo would not hunt for you, so long as you stayed on our side of the river, the rest of the woods beyond the river belonged to him. As per usual Friday ritual, my friends and I filled our backpacks with our swim trunks, snacks, soda, and other trinkets to spend the rest of the day playing in the woods. As we were leaving, my little sister came running out of the house. I was 13, and she was 9. She was begging me to come spend a day in the woods with my friends and normally, I would say no, but it was such a beautiful day, and she really was not much of a hassle to have along, so I said yes. There were 4 of us, including my little sister and I. It was 3 in the afternoon, at the beginning of June, so we knew we would have daylight for quite a while. Off we went into the woods, taking the same trail that we took every time. The trail led us straight to the river, where we would set up a little camp, and spend the rest of the day playing, and swimming. A few hours rolled by, and we were pretty tired. There was not much left to do, so I suggested that we pack up, and head home. Now, 13 can be quite a rebellious age, the age where you start to disobey your parents, maybe act out in school here and there, try a cigarette, pretty typical teenage behavior. "Let's cross to the other side of the river," one of my friends exclaimed. In my head, I knew this was a terrible idea. Growing up here, you barely have any rules to follow. Not going to the other side of the river was an explicit one, however. Yeah. I've always wanted to do that, my other friend said in agreement. In my head I knew this was a bad idea, but I also did not want to seem like a chicken in front of my friends. Well. Okay. I said cautiously. My little sister looked at me, her big blue eyes were full of fear. I reassured her, telling her that nothing bad would happen. My parents were asleep, my little sister was asleep, I was the only one awake for this. I lay under my covers, noticing every little sound my old house made. And then I heard it, the kitchen door was opening. It makes a distinct squeak when it opens. I began to shake. Wendigo had come. I could hear it moving about our basement, knocking a glass over, opening cupboards. The sound of fast footsteps below me. The fast footsteps became louder as Wendigo made its way up our staircase, and to my bedroom door. The knob turned, and Wendigo was inside my bedroom. I shook violently, my hands clammy, my stomach sick. I hid under my covers as I listened to the low rumble grow louder and louder with each footstep it took in my room. And then whoosh, the same sound it had made as it hunted us in the woods. The rumbling had stopped, and the fast footsteps were gone. Wendigo too was gone as I emerged from under my covers. But where did it go? The sun shined brightly into my room the next morning, and I hopped out of bed. I went downstairs to find my parents sitting in the kitchen, my dad reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, my mom frying bacon for breakfast. "Morning, champ, you must have slept well after your big day yesterday," my dad said. He was right, it was 11 a.m., and I rarely sleep past 9:30. "The same for your sister," my mom said. "Why don't you go wake her up, champ?" my dad said. I immediately ran upstairs to our room, and to this day, it is still the most horrific sight that I have ever laid eyes upon. My little sister's bed was empty. "Mom. Dad. Come quick," I cried out. They both ran upstairs. "Oh my God. Where is she?" my mom said. She was already beginning to cry. We looked everywhere, she was not in the house. My parents looked outside, and within an hour, a search party had formed. They searched the woods top to bottom, but she was nowhere to be found. My parents believed that she had wandered off to the woods in the morning, fell in the lake, and drowned. But I knew why they could not find her. I knew why they would never find her. They were looking in the wrong side of the woods. Sixth story. By you/Beardify. When I was a child, my mother tried to hide me from a demon. From beneath a heap of blankets, I listened to the storm pass through. The forest groaned in the wind, hail rattled against the wood plank roof, and my mother huddled against me, telling me a fairy tale that I already knew by heart. Once upon a time, there lived a brave queen and her son, the handsome young prince. They lived in a cabin deep in the woods, because the brave queen had a terrible secret. The young prince's father was secretly a terrible demon. He could fool the rest of the world, but not the brave queen. She knew that while he looked and spoke like a man, he was really a demon in disguise. That's why she escaped from the palace with her young prince and hid him away someplace where the demon would never, ever find him. What did the demon look like? I always asked, even though I was as terrified as I was fascinated by the answer that was coming. "Well," my mother began, her paws filled by a peal of thunder, "his skin is as gray and rotten as an old dead tree. He has 6 fingers on each hand, and his nails are as sharp as hawthorn needles. His smile is as wide as a grinning deer's skull's, and when he opens his mouth, it's big enough to swallow a little boy whole. But nobody else can see it. To them, the demon is another person, just like you or me. He's very clever, and it wasn't easy for the brave queen and her handsome prince to get away. The demon hired wicked men to follow them, and the brave queen and her handsome young prince had to give up all the luxuries that they used to have in the palace. Several times, they were nearly caught. When that happened, they had to run away and leave everything behind. It wasn't easy, but the brave queen would have done anything in the world to be with her handsome young prince. The battering wind and rain were so loud that I could barely hear my mother's voice, but it didn't matter, I could feel her warmth. I snuggled against her and fell asleep. I saw the demon for the first time the next morning, or at least, I thought I did. My mother and I were collecting mushrooms by the creek when the hair on the back of my neck suddenly stood on end. I was being watched, I could feel it. I looked frantically around for my mother, but she turned her back to me for a moment as she foraged. Normally, she never let me out of her sight. How long had the demon been stalking us, just waiting for an opportunity like this? A twig snapped, I spun around to see a black, vaguely humanoid shape moving toward me through the woods. I ran to my mother, too terrified of the thing behind me to even scream. Grasping immediately that something was wrong, my mother abandoned her mushrooms, scooped me into her arms, and ran for the safety of our cabin. No demon came crashing through our door, but when we returned to the creek a few hours later, the mushrooms and basket were gone. My mother had always carried a pistol in her belt, but after that, she kept it drawn in her hand. As dusk settled on the forest, she burst into the clearing that surrounded our cabin, searching for any sign of the demon. A gunshot reverberated among the endless trees. "Come out, you bastard!" My mother screamed. "You might want him, but you'll never have him." It was then that I heard a second set of footsteps fast approaching the cabin. There was no time to close it or to warn my mother. I pressed myself against the wall and shut my eyes instead. Seconds later, a small square something flew through the cabin window. It was a picture. It showed my mother and I smiling with a man who looked like me. On the back, strange symbols had been scribbled with black ink. I peeked out the empty window into the gloomy woods. Whoever had thrown in through the window was long gone. I found myself staring at the picture for a long time, wondering if it was some kind of evil magic that kept me from tearing my eyes away. I was so lost in those three smiling faces that I didn't even notice that my mother was back. She snatched the photo out of my grasp with trembling hands, muttering two blood-chilling words. "It's him." Pistol in hand, she started packing right away and jumped at every sound. Once everything we could take had been packed into her ancient, rumbling Chevy truck, she splashed gasoline through every room of the cabin and struck a match. Before we drove away, she threw the photo into the blaze. Fog had rolled in with the cool night air, turning the woods into a sea of white. We hardly ever left the cabin, and the overgrown dirt track that led away from it was difficult to navigate at the best of times. My mother drove white-knuckled, gritting her teeth at each pothole and scraping bush. To me, their thorns sounded like the claws of the demon. With a sudden boom, the steering wheel went slack. My mother braked frantically, and when I saw the whites of her terrified eyes I knew that we were thinking the same thing. Both tires bursting had been no accident. Something flew out of the fog and crashed into the driver's side window, creating a spiderweb pattern crack. My mother shrieked, covering her face against the glass as something else shattered it. Hands reached through the shattered glass. They pinned my mother's arms to her side as she fired her pistol wildly. In the cramped space, the sound was deafening, I shut my eyes and covered my ears, waiting for the nightmare to be over. Instead, my mother was dragged out the window into the darkness. No matter how tightly I pressed my hands over my ears, I could still hear her screams. They turned to moans and finally, to silence. That silence, that waiting, was worse than everything I'd experienced so far. In the end, those unfamiliar hands closed around me, just as I always knew they would. "It's all right, son," a husky, unfamiliar voice sobbed into my neck. "It's over. It's finally over." The case was quite sensational for its time. There were many who questioned the motives and legality of a father who used private detectives and second-hand police chain spikes to recover his son when the law wouldn't do it, even if the mother was a member of a cult. At the time, of course, I was concerned with other things, like all of the big words the men in white coats around me were using. Words like malnutrition, illiterate, and brainwashing. Later, there would be other, better words, words like school, bicycle, games, and friends. My favorite words of all, however, I learned thanks to my father, family, and home. 7th story. I believe what I saw was a Wendigo. "Hello, Dr. Sebastian, I would like to speak with you." That is what a cold voice said to me over the phone. The voice then explained that there was a family who needed food to be delivered to them, and I then asked why she asked me an astrophysicist. She then replied with, "We would really like you to deliver or at least purchase food for them." I could not say no, so I asked her for the location of the family. She gave it to me, and I decided to ask the family what they want when I arrived. I then drove to the location, parked my truck, and entered the small wooden house. When I entered, I got a chilling feeling in my spine. I then drew my firearm, and walked slowly while calling for someone. It was pitch black within the house except the small amount of light entering the house through the curtains. I then walked into their kitchen, and that is when I froze in fear. There it was sitting with its legs crossed, looking at me. It was as tall as me sitting, and I'm around 6 feet 5 inches in height. It had long talons, it was skinny, its skin was gray, and its eyes were almost as white as light, but far less bright. I could see its rib cage, and then it spoke. It said in a child's voice, "Hello, Dr. Sebastian, how are you?" I screamed like a Viking in the midst of war, and shot it 8 times in the heart. Its scream sounded like an Aztec death whistle. I ran back to my truck, and left. I knew that thing is what I spoke to, and I knew if I were to tell my friend, he would show up with his entire team, and they would have been turned into its dinner. That is all I can remember, but the way it looked at me screamed, "I have ascertained your soul, and there is nothing you can do about it." I visited the location 2 years later with my mates. The place was in a horrible state, the wall had scratch marks, there was urine everywhere, and the only thing we could smell was the urine and blood. As I stepped into my apartment I got a weird feeling. My roommate then greeted me. She asked me what I had done, and I told her that I went with her brother and our friends to an old cabin. 2 hours later, while I'm trying to sleep, I hear a tapping noise. It was coming from my window, and I knew something was wrong. My apartment is on the 2nd floor. There are no trees for at least 10 to 20 meters, and most trees in the area are short. I did not even dare to move, and then my roommate came into my room. "CB, do you have toothpaste? Because I have run out," she said. She then looked at the window, and the tapping speed increased. "Don't move," I said. After 2 hours, the sound stopped, and we both slept in the living room. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.